Imagine looking up at the night sky thousands of years ago. No city lights, no satellites, just an endless tapestry of stars, planets, and mysterious lights moving in ways that defied explanation. In that vast darkness, a sudden comet could ignite fear across continents. An eclipse could halt armies mid-battle. The steady dance of planets might crown kings or condemn them. For our ancestors, the heavens were not just a spectacle, they were a message, a warning, a divine script that held the power to shape human destiny in ways we can scarcely comprehend today. This was a world where politics trembled at the sight of a shooting star, where prophecies were written in the constellations, and where panic could spread like wildfire with something as simple as the moon turning red. From the palaces of Rome to the courts of China, celestial events dictated the decisions of emperors, inspired myths of gods and monsters, and stirred movements that altered the course of history itself. These moments remind us that long before telescopes and satellites, humanity was already looking upward, not just in wonder, but in search of meaning, power, and connection. In this video, we're journeying back through time to explore how comets, eclipses, and planetary alignments became more than just astronomical phenomena. They were forces that shaped civilizations. We'll uncover why a comet's appearance could unnerve a conqueror, how an eclipse might save or doom a dynasty, and why the stars held such sway over the hearts and minds of people across the ancient world. You'll discover the hidden threads that tie the cosmos to human history, and you might just find yourself seeing the night sky in a whole new light by the time we're through. So settle in, we're about to unravel mysteries written in the stars and trace how the heavens above forever changed the world below. Picture yourself standing on a windswept plain 4,000 years ago, under a sky so profoundly dark it feels like a vast, inverted bowl of obsidian, pierced by countless points of cold, brilliant light. This was the universal canvas of antiquity, a nightly spectacle completely free from the orange haze of modern cities. In this profound darkness, the Milky Way wasn't a faint smudge but a radiant river of ghosts. Planets weren't mere dots but wandering gods charting their own mysterious courses. For ancient civilizations, this wasn't just a beautiful view. It was the ultimate source of order, a cosmic clock, and a direct hotline to the divine. They didn't just observe the sky, they lived within it, and its rhythms dictated everything from when to plant crops to when to crown a king. Across the globe, from the mud-brick ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the stone circles of Britain, cultures independently developed incredibly sophisticated systems to track these celestial patterns. The Babylonians, for instance, weren't just stargazers, they were meticulous data scientists. They recorded the movements of Venus on clay tablets for centuries, not out of simple curiosity, but because they believed the planet's behavior could predict everything from market prices to the outcome of a war. In Egypt, the annual heliacal rising of Sirius, the moment the star first became visible just before dawn, was a national event signaling the imminent flooding of the Nile. This flood was the lifeblood of their civilization, and its celestial herald meant it was time to prepare the fields, reorganize labor, and for the pharaoh to perform rituals ensuring the kingdom's prosperity. Their astronomy was never a pure science divorced from daily life. It was a practical, spiritual, and political necessity. This deep interconnection is what scholars like Anthony Aveni, a pioneer in the field of archaeoastronomy, describe as a truly interdisciplinary worldview. For the ancients, there was no separation between what we now call astronomy, religion, and politics. They were a single, seamless understanding of the universe. A comet's sudden appearance wasn't a ball of ice and rock following a predictable orbit. It was a divine brushstroke across the ceiling of the world, a message that demanded interpretation. A solar eclipse wasn't merely the moon's shadow. It was the sun god turning his face away, a moment of cosmic vulnerability that often signaled a king's failure to maintain harmony with the heavens. The sky was a mirror reflecting and influencing the events of the human world below. This belief system created a powerful feedback loop. Celestial events shaped human action, and human action through rituals, sacrifices, and prayers was performed in an attempt to shape or appease the celestial forces. This foundational relationship between Earth and sky sets the stage for every story we're about to explore, where a single celestial event could trigger a cascade of real-world consequences, altering the fates of empires and the lives of millions. Now imagine the year 1066. In the skies above England, a strange and terrifying sight appears: a star with a fiery tail, burning brighter than any other, moving across the heavens in a path that defied all understanding. This was Halley's comet, and for the Anglo-Saxons watching below, it could mean only one thing: disaster. Their king, Harold II, would have felt a cold dread, for comets were universally seen as omens of upheaval, the overthrow of kings. And across the Channel, William the Conqueror saw that very same comet and interpreted it as a divine sign blessing his audacious claim to the English throne. He would later have the comet embroidered into the Bayeux Tapestry, a permanent record of the celestial endorsement he believed secured his victory at the Battle of Hastings. In one brilliant, streaking moment, the course of British history was irrevocably altered, all under the watchful eye of a wandering star. This deep-seated fear of comets was not unique to medieval Europe. It was a global phenomenon that stretched back millennia. The very nature of a comet, its sudden, unpredictable appearance, its eerie, ethereal glow, its long tail sweeping across the sky like a celestial broom made it the perfect portent for ancient observers. Unlike the orderly march of the planets or the reliable cycles of the moon, a comet was a rule breaker, an anomaly that screamed that the natural order had been disrupted. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder perfectly captured this ancient anxiety when he wrote that comets make kings anxious, seeing them as dire warnings of famine, war, and the fall of royal houses. They were the ultimate wild card in the celestial deck, and their appearance sent ripples of panic through the highest levels of power. Perhaps no single event illustrates this political power more vividly than the comet that blazed in the sky just months after the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. The Romans, already reeling from the shocking murder of their dictator and the ensuing chaos, saw this comet during games held in Caesar's honor. To them, it was not a harbinger of doom, but a sign of something equally world-shaking: his apotheosis, his ascension to become a god. His adopted son and heir, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, seized upon this interpretation with brilliant political cunning. He used the Julian star as powerful propaganda, proclaiming that the heavens themselves had confirmed Caesar's divinity and, by extension, legitimized his own right to rule. He even had a star placed on statues of Caesar, a permanent symbol linking his family to the cosmos. In this case, a comet didn't just predict change. It was actively used to engineer it, transforming a moment of political vulnerability into a foundation for imperial power. The psychological impact of these events cannot be overstated. For a ruler whose authority was believed to be divinely ordained, a comet was a direct challenge, a public referendum written in the sky that questioned their fitness to rule. This fear of the unknown could trigger drastic and immediate responses. In ancient China, the appearance of a broom star, their term for a comet, would send the emperor into a period of fasting and reflection, attempting to determine what heavenly rule he had broken. He might issue pardons, change policies, or dismiss unpopular ministers in a desperate attempt to rectify the cosmic imbalance the comet signaled. In this way, the unpredictable nature of comets didn't just cause panic. It became a genuine mechanism for political change, a celestial check on absolute power that could force a king to alter his behavior or face the consequences. The sky was watching, and its sudden, fiery messages held a terrifying and very real authority. Now, shift your gaze from the streaking terror of comets to a different kind of celestial drama, one where the world doesn't gain a terrifying new light, but instead loses its most vital one. Imagine the steady, reassuring sun, the giver of life and the very measure of time, suddenly and inexplicably beginning to vanish. The air grows cold, the sky deepens to a twilight purple, and stars prick through the midday darkness. Birds cease their singing and return to their nests, confused by the false night. For ancient observers, a total solar eclipse was the ultimate suspension of reality, a moment when the fundamental rules of the cosmos seemed to break, plunging the world into a silent, chilling awe that often curdled into sheer terror. Across countless cultures, this dramatic theft of the sun demanded a mythological explanation, and the interpretations were often visceral and frightening. The ancient Chinese believed a celestial dragon was devouring the sun, a ND Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter, making a tremendous noise to scare the beast away and restore light to the world. The Vikings told tales of sky wolves chasing the sun and moon. In Hindu mythology, the decapitated demon Rahu was said to occasionally swallow the sun, only for it to fall out of his severed neck. These weren't just charming stories, they were attempts to rationalize the incomprehensible, to give a name and a form to a phenomenon that felt like a direct attack on the natural order. This interpretation meant an eclipse was rarely a neutral event. It was almost universally seen as an expression of divine displeasure, a cosmic critique of the human world below, and most specifically of its ruler. This belief was formalized into state policy in places like ancient China, where court astronomers maintained meticulous records of eclipses for over 2,000 years. Their role was not merely scientific, it was profoundly political. The emperor, or the son of heaven, ruled under the mandate of heaven, a contract that required him to maintain perfect harmony between heaven and earth. An eclipse was the ultimate report card, a glaring sign that the emperor had failed in his duties, that his virtue was lacking, or that his administration was corrupt. The response was swift and ritualized. The emperor would often retreat to fast and reflect on his mistakes, while his court would scrutinize government policies, looking for injustices to correct. In extreme cases, unpopular ministers might be dismissed or even executed to appease the heavens. The eclipse served as a powerful, impersonal check on imperial power, a celestial mechanism that could force political change and accountability. The potential for eclipses to directly alter the course of human events is perfectly captured by a famous story from the ancient historian Herodotus. He recounts that in 585 BC, a brutal war between the Lydians and the Medes had reached a bloody stalemate. As the two armies clashed, a total solar eclipse suddenly plunged the battlefield into an eerie darkness. Both sides immediately stopped fighting. They interpreted this overwhelming celestial event not as a victory omen for one side, but as a shared sign from the gods that they were displeased with the entire conflict. The shock and awe of the eclipse were so profound that the leaders, King Alyattes of Lydia and Cyaxares of Media, immediately laid down their weapons and negotiated a peace treaty sealed by a royal marriage. What years of warfare could not achieve, a few minutes of celestial darkness accomplished, demonstrating the eclipse's unparalleled power to impose diplomacy through sheer terror. As astronomer David Dearborn has pointed out, the most fascinating political aspect of eclipses may not have been their unexpected appearances, but their predictable ones. While the average person experienced an eclipse as a shocking and random omen, learned priests and court astrologers in cultures like Babylon had begun to calculate their likelihood using centuries of recorded data. This knowledge was a potent form of behind-the-scenes power. An advisor could warn his king of an impending eclipse, allowing the ruler to stage a public ritual of penance that would seem to avert the disaster, thereby strengthening his image as a pious and powerful leader in tune with the gods. Conversely, an astrologer working for a rival faction might keep the prediction secret, allowing the eclipse to occur unexpectedly and undermine the king's authority. In this way, the slow advancement of astronomical science did not eliminate the eclipse's political power. It simply transformed it into a sophisticated tool for manipulation, coercion, and control, proving that even the most predictable shadows could be used to shape the fate of empires. But if the sudden disappearance of the sun was a shocking celestial verdict, the moon's slow, bloody transformation during a lunar eclipse was a more prolonged and intimate kind of dread. Picture the full moon, a familiar silver beacon in the night, beginning to dim. It doesn't vanish, but instead deepens into an ominous, coppery red, a color universally associated in the ancient world with blood, fire, and impending chaos. This was not a brief moment of darkness, but a drawn-out spectacle that could last for hours, giving ample time for fear and speculation to ferment in the hearts of those watching below. Unlike a solar eclipse, which was visible only along a narrow path, a lunar eclipse could be seen by half the planet at once, making it a shared experience of anxiety that could ripple across entire kingdoms and cultures. In the sophisticated astrological systems of Mesopotamia, the moon was intimately tied to the person of the king and the health of the nation itself. The celestial manuals they relied on, like the extensive series known as Enuma Anu Enlil, were essentially textbooks of political risk assessment written in the stars. They contained precise, if terrifying, interpretations. A lunar eclipse in a certain month might predict the death of a king. Its color could foretell famine or plague. The direction of the shadow's retreat might indicate which neighboring country would launch an invasion. These were not abstract predictions, they were treated as concrete intelligence reports. The famous Venus tablet of Amasajuka, part of this series, shows how the movements of planets were meticulously logged to provide the king with forecasts for his reign, turning the sky into a strategic dashboard for survival. This belief that a lunar eclipse directly threatened the monarch's life led to one of the most fascinating and bizarre rituals of the ancient world, the substitute king ritual, or Shah Puhai. When court astrologers predicted an eclipse portending the king's death, the real ruler would go into hiding, temporarily surrendering his throne to a commoner or a condemned prisoner. This substitute would be treated as royalty, wearing the king's robes, eating his food, all to literally absorb the evil omen intended for the true monarch. After the eclipse passed, the ritual concluded in the only way it could. The substitute was swiftly and ceremonially executed, his death fulfilling the prophecy and thereby protecting the genuine king. This chilling practice shows the extreme lengths to which ancient rulers would go to defy the celestial warnings, using human sacrifice as a political shield against the perceived will of the gods. The power of these lunar omens, however, was not fixed. It resided entirely in their interpretation, and that made them a potent tool for psychological warfare. One of the most brilliant examples of this manipulation occurred on the eve of the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Alexander the Great's army, vastly outnumbered by the forces of the Persian king Darius Roman III, was camped under the night sky when a lunar eclipse began. For many of Alexander's Macedonian and Greek soldiers, steeped in their own superstitions, this blood-red moon was a terrifying portent of their impending doom. Panic began to spread through the ranks, but Alexander's own seers and advisors, perhaps understanding the need for morale, quickly offered a counter-interpretation. They declared that the eclipse was not a bad omen for them, but for the Persians. The Greeks associated the moon with the goddess Artemis, and the Persians with their own deities. Alexander's propagandists framed the event as a sign that the gods were turning away from Darius and toward the Macedonian cause. This masterful reframing of a celestial event transformed army-wide panic into confident resolve, and the next day, Alexander won a decisive victory that effectively ended the Persian Empire. The moon hadn't changed, but its meaning had been weaponized, proving that the most powerful outcome of any omen was not what the gods intended, but what a clever leader could convince his people to believe. While the sudden terror of comets and eclipses commanded immediate attention, the slow, majestic dance of the planets offered a different kind of celestial power, one of prophecy, patience, and profound political calculation. Imagine the Babylonian astrologer priests scanning the heavens night after night, century after century, their clay tablets filling with precise data on the movements of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Venus. To them, these weren't mere points of light. They were physical manifestations of the gods themselves, Marduk, Ninurta, Nergal, and Ishtar, strolling across the dome of the sky and dictating the fate of the world below. Their movements were a complex divine language, and a rare event like a great conjunction, where Jupiter and Saturn appeared to meet in the same celestial longitude, was the equivalent of the gods issuing a royal decree. These conjunctions, occurring roughly every 20 years, were seen as markers of tremendous societal shift, heralding the end of one dynasty and the glorious rise of another, a celestial changing of the guard that could justify rebellion or legitimize a new ruling house. This meticulous tracking transformed astronomy into the ultimate source of political intelligence. A king wouldn't dream of launching a military campaign, signing a peace treaty, or even crowning his heir without first consulting his court astrologers for the most auspicious planetary alignment. The timing of every significant state action was choreographed to the movements of the heavens. A coronation held under a strong, visible Jupiter might promise a long and prosperous reign, while a war launched under a retrograde Mars could be seen as inviting certain disaster. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a sophisticated system of risk management and public relations. By aligning his actions with the perceived will of the gods, a ruler could bolster the confidence of his people, unify his court, and demonstrate his divine mandate to rule. The planets became silent partners in governance, their positions providing both a guide for action and a powerful tool for propaganda. No ancient empire mastered this celestial public relations game better than Rome. Following in the footsteps of his divine father Julius Caesar, Emperor Augustus became a virtuoso in using the stars to craft his political narrative. He didn't just benefit from the comet scene after Caesar's death. He actively promoted it on coins and in public monuments as the Iulium Sidus, the Julian star, a permanent sign that his adoptive father had taken his place among the gods and that his own rule was therefore divinely sanctioned. But his astrological propaganda didn't stop there. His personal astrologer, a man named Theogenes, reportedly cast his horoscope and proclaimed a destiny of incredible power. So potent was this prediction believed to be that Augustus later, publicly released his own horoscope to convince the people of his inevitable, preordained success. He understood that controlling the celestial narrative was as important as controlling the legions. As historian Tamsin Barton has explored, this practice was utterly integral to Roman political life. Emperors from Tiberius to Hadrian routinely employed court astrologers, though their relationship with these advisors was often fraught with tension. A ruler wanted the knowledge these stargazers possessed, but he also feared they could predict his death or, worse, sell that prediction to his enemies. This led to the bizarrely contradictory practice of emperors banishing astrologers from Rome while secretly keeping one on their personal payroll. The power of a planetary prediction was so immense that it had to be controlled. A well-timed leak about a favorable alignment could boost an emperor's popularity, while a prediction of doom could spark a revolution. The stars didn't just influence politics, they were a currency of power, a weapon of information warfare that could build up an emperor or tear him down, proving that the most enduring power often came not from the edge of a sword, but from the silent, predictable motion of a planet across a dark night sky. Yet for all the deliberate, calculated power of planetary alignments, the sky could also deliver moments of pure, unpredictable chaos that left no room for calculation, only sheer, unadulterated panic. Picture a serene night suddenly shattered not by a single brilliant comet, but by dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of silent, streaking lights. The very fabric of the heavens appears to crack and fall inward, a torrent of fire raining down as if the stars themselves were abandoning their posts. This was the terrifying spectacle of a great meteor shower, an event ancient cultures rarely saw as beautiful. Instead, they interpreted this celestial bombardment as everything from warring gods and dragons clashing overhead to the very fabric of the universe coming undone. It was a phenomenon so vast and democratic in its visibility that it could spark a unified wave of dread across entire continents, turning awe into outright terror and speculation into immediate action. In the meticulous court records of ancient China, where celestial events were logged with bureaucratic precision, meteor showers were consistently categorized as dire portents. The Leonid storm, which returns every 33 years with particular intensity, was described in 1500-century annals as stars falling like rain, an event immediately followed by notations of famine, rebellion, or the death of a high official. The interpretation was direct and political. The heavens were expressing violent disapproval of the current ruler or his policies. This wasn't a quiet omen for astrologers to debate in private. It was a public spectacle that demanded a public response. The emperor and his court would be expected to perform elaborate rituals of atonement, offering sacrifices, examining edicts for injustice, and publicly demonstrating humility to console a frightened populace, and they hoped, ward off the impending disaster the falling stars foretold. A particularly striking example of this political fallout occurred in 1490, during the reign of the Hongzhi Emperor of the Ming Dynasty. A spectacular meteor shower lit up the night sky, and it was followed shortly after by a devastating meteorite impact in Qingyong district that reportedly killed thousands. In the fragile political ecosystem of the court, this was not seen as a random tragedy, but as a catastrophic celestial indictment. Factions opposed to the emperor's policies seized upon the event, using it as proof that heaven was withdrawing its mandate due to his failures. The shower and its aftermath became a powerful rhetorical weapon, a talking point to criticize the emperor's leadership and push for changes in his administration. The sky itself had become a participant in the political debates of the day, its silent, fiery streaks lending weight to the arguments of critics and shaking the confidence of the ruler. This anxiety about the stability of the cosmos was not confined to China. In the Western world, the Bible's book of Revelation used the image of falling stars to symbolize ultimate upheaval and divine judgment. Chapter 6, verse 13 describes the stars of heaven falling to earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind, a metaphor for the utter collapse of the established order. This powerful imagery cemented in the cultural consciousness the idea that the falling away of celestial bodies was synonymous with the end of an age, a revolution, or a great purification by fire. Whether viewed through a lens of religious prophecy or astrological omen, the message was consistent. A sky full of falling stars was a sign that the world was on the brink of profound and terrifying change. What makes meteor showers so fascinating as a historical catalyst is their combination of breathtaking transience and overwhelming scale. A comet might hang in the sky for weeks and an eclipse for minutes, but a great meteor storm is a frantic, hour-long barrage of light. There is no time for careful interpretation by court scholars. The event unfolds in real time for everyone to see simultaneously, creating an instant collective psychological shock. This shared experience of wonder and fear could unite disparate communities in a single narrative of panic, force rulers into swift public displays of contrition, and provide ammunition for anyone seeking to challenge the status quo. They demonstrate, perhaps more clearly than any other celestial event, that it wasn't the astronomical reality of the phenomenon that shaped history, but the human reaction to it, the desperate, universal need to find meaning in the chaos and to believe that even the most fleeting flash of light in the dark was a message meant just for us. Behind every terrified king gazing at a blood-red moon or every emperor seeking a comet's meaning stood a far more powerful figure, the court astrologer. This was no mere stargazer with a telescope. He was a master of the most critical intelligence network in the ancient world, a political strategist, a psychological operative, and the sole interpreter of the divine will written across the night sky. In an age where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was blurred, these figures held the ultimate keys to power. They could calm a panicking populace, legitimize a dubious claim to the throne, or, with a single ominous prediction, orchestrate the downfall of an empire. Their role was to stand between heaven and earth, translating the silent, majestic movements of the cosmos into actionable advice that shaped the fate of millions. In the great civilizations of Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica, this wasn't a fringe occupation. It was the very core of the state bureaucracy. In the ziggurats of Babylon and the pyramids of the Maya, the priest-astrologer was an indispensable pillar of the ruling class. Theirs was a lifetime of rigorous study, memorizing centuries of celestial records to detect the patterns and omens encoded in the stars. This knowledge gave them unparalleled influence over the rhythm of public life. They determined the astronomically perfect moment for every significant event: a king's coronation, the signing of a vital treaty, the launch of a military campaign. None of these actions were simply decided by human whim. They were scheduled for the precise day and hour when the planetary alignments were most favorable, a practice known as electional astrology. To act against these celestial advisories was to invite certain disaster, making the court astrologer the ultimate scheduler of statecraft, a divine logistician whose calculations could dictate the timing of war and peace. Perhaps no story better illustrates the life or death gravity of their work than the Babylonian substitute king ritual. When these master astronomers calculated the impending arrival of a lunar eclipse that their manuals foretold would mean the death of the true king, they didn't just deliver a warning. They orchestrated an elaborate piece of political theater designed to cheat fate. The real monarch would secretly step aside, and a substitute, often a mentally ill person or a condemned prisoner, would be placed on the throne. For the duration of the eclipse's threat, This substitute would be treated with all the royal honors, eating the king's food and sleeping in his bed, all to convincingly absorb the evil omen intended for the ruler. Once the eclipse passed and the danger was deemed averted, the grim finale of the ritual ensured the omen was fulfilled. The substitute king was quietly executed, along with his attendants, sealing the cosmic bargain and allowing the true king to safely reclaim his throne. This chilling practice shows the astrologer's role wasn't just to predict the future, but to actively manipulate it, using human sacrifice as a shield to protect the political order from celestial displeasure. We know the intricate details of their work from the thousands of cuneiform tablets they left behind. These weren't books of vague prophecies, they were meticulous reports filed directly with the king. One such report to the Assyrian king Esarhaddon reads, "If the moon is eclipsed in the month of Nisan, the king will die, the country will be thrown into chaos. There will be a revolt against the king." But the astrologer didn't just deliver doom, he offered a solution in the same report. "Let the king, my lord, appoint a substitute. The king should perform the ritual so that the evil does not approach the king, my lord." This demonstrates the immense practicality of their role. They were crisis managers, providing the threat assessment and the contingency plan in one. Their power flowed from this dual capacity to both identify a crisis and provide the ritual means to resolve it, making them the most trusted and most feared advisors in the ancient world. They held a monopoly on the interpretation of divine intent, and in a world where the gods were believed to direct everything from the harvest to the outcome of battle, that made them the ultimate wielders of soft power, the hidden architects of history who shaped empires not with weapons but with the wisdom of the stars. To truly understand how deeply the stars could govern human affairs, we must travel back to the very birthplace of the practice, the Fertile Crescent of ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, under the vast, open skies of what is now Iraq, humanity first began to systematically record the movements of the heavens, not as an abstract science, but as the most critical form of political intelligence ever conceived. In the bustling intellectual centers of Babylon and Assyria, the first astronomers were also the most powerful priests and advisors to the king. Their laboratory was the rooftop of a towering ziggurat. Their tools were simple sighting rods, and their records were pressed into soft clay tablets that would harden and survive for millennia, giving us an astonishingly detailed window into a world where every twinkle in the night sky was a potential memo from the gods. The sheer volume of their work is staggering. Tens of thousands of these cuneiform tablets have been recovered, and they reveal a bureaucracy of stargazing that was as meticulous as any modern government agency. They tracked everything: the rising and setting of planets, the phases of the moon, the appearance of comets, and the timing of eclipses, with a precision born of centuries of continuous observation. But they weren't just collecting data for its own sake. They were devout believers in a fundamental principle: the universe was a unified, interconnected whole. What happened in the macrocosm of the heavens directly reflected and influenced events in the microcosm of the human world, especially the fate of the king and his kingdom. This belief system, known as Mesopotamian celestial divination, turned the sky into a divine text, and these scholar priests were its master translators. Perhaps no single artifact better illustrates this than the Venus tablet of Amasajuka. This remarkable document, dating from the 7th century BC, but believed to be a copy of much older observations from the reign of King Amasajuka some 1,000 years earlier, meticulously records the appearances and disappearances of the planet Venus over a 21-year period. But it is far more than an astronomical log. Next to each celestial event is its corresponding interpretation for the state. The tablet prescribes that if Venus appears in a certain month, the harvest will be plentiful. If it disappears on a certain date, hostilities will break out in a specific region. The fortunes of the king, the outcome of battles, the prices of grain, all were thought to be foretold in the steady rhythm of this one brilliant planet, known to them as the manifestation of the goddess Ishtar. This was the ultimate fusion of science and statecraft, a direct hotline from the cosmos to the king's council chamber. The most feared of all celestial reports, however, concerned the moon. A lunar eclipse was not a mere curiosity. It was a code-red emergency, a direct and personal threat to the life of the monarch. The vast collection of omens known as the Enuma Anu in Lil served as their field manual for this crisis. One typical omen reads, "If an eclipse occurs on the 14th day of the month and the god, the moon, in his eclipse becomes dark on the side of the upper part, the king of the world will die suddenly." The gods will not give a verdict for the land. A message like this, delivered to a king like Esarhaddon of Assyria, was not taken metaphorically. It was a concrete death threat from the heavens, and it triggered an immediate and terrifying protocol known as the Substitute King ritual. The procedure was a breathtaking act of political theater designed to deceive the gods. Upon receiving the warning of an ill-omened eclipse, the true king would publicly step down, and a substitute, often a mentally ill man or a condemned criminal from the lowest rungs of society, would be placed on the throne. For the days of the eclipse's perceived danger, this stand-in would be treated with all the royal honors, eating the king's food and sleeping in his bed, all to convincingly absorb the malignant fate. The real king would live in hiding, a commoner once more. When the danger period passed, the grim finale ensured the omen was fulfilled. The substitute king and his queen would be ritually executed, their deaths satisfying the celestial prophecy and allowing the true ruler to safely reclaim his throne, his kingdom saved from divine wrath. This chilling practice reveals the absolute power celestial signs held. They could literally depose a king and demand a human sacrifice to protect the political order. This Mesopotamian system of celestial interpretation was no isolated superstition. It was a sophisticated, logical framework that became the bedrock for all subsequent Western astrology and political astronomy. Their methods were adopted and adapted by the Greeks, the Romans, and beyond, spreading the idea that the sky was a mirror of earthly power. The priests of Mesopotamia created the original playbook for how to use the heavens to guide a nation, warn a leader, and control a population. They established the enduring template that would echo for centuries, that those who could read the messages of the gods written in the stars held the ultimate key to power on earth. Now, journey from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the sun-baked sands of the Nile, where the celestial drama played out on an even grander scale, woven into the very identity of a civilization that saw its ruler not just as a king, but as a living god on earth. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was the human incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, a divine bridge between the world of mortals and the realm of the gods. This wasn't merely political propaganda, it was the foundational belief of their entire society, and the sky was the ultimate script that validated this divine contract. Here, astronomy wasn't just about predicting events, it was about maintaining the cosmic order of truth, justice, and harmony that prevented the universe from collapsing into chaos. The stars, planets, and sun were not just observers in this struggle, they were active participants, and their movements were direct communications about the health of this sacred balance. The most critical celestial event in the Egyptian world was not a terrifying eclipse or a mysterious comet, but an annual, predictable, and deeply welcomed sight, the heliacal rising of Sirius, known to them as the goddess Sopdet. After a period of invisibility, Sirius would reappear just before dawn in the eastern sky, a brilliant spark heralding the most important event of the Egyptian year, the imminent flooding of the Nile. This flood was the lifeblood of the kingdom. It deposited rich, fertile silt across the farmland, ensuring a bountiful harvest that would feed the population, fill the granaries, and fund the state's ambitious building projects. The pharaoh's entire legitimacy was tied to this cycle. A poor flood meant famine, unrest, and a direct challenge to the king's divine efficacy. The return of Sirius was therefore the ultimate celestial thumbs up, a sign that the pharaoh was upholding his side of the bargain with the gods and that Mat was preserved. He would perform rituals of gratitude, demonstrating his role as the chief priest of the nation and the guarantor of its prosperity, directly linking his power to the reliable, life-giving rhythm of the stars. This connection between the earthly and the divine was set in stone, literally. The monumental architecture of Egypt is a testament to their sophisticated celestial alignment. The Great Pyramids of Giza are famously oriented with incredible precision to the cardinal directions, but their connection to the sky runs even deeper. The so-called air shafts within the Great Pyramid of Khufu are now believed by many Egyptologists to have been meticulously aligned with specific stars. One pair points toward the circumpolar stars, which the Egyptians called the imperishable ones, stars that never set, symbolizing the eternal destiny of the king's soul. Another pair was aligned with Orion's belt and Sirius, connecting the pharaoh directly to Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and his stellar counterpart. The pyramid itself was not just a tomb, it was a machine for resurrection, a launchpad designed to catapult the soul of the god-king from his earthly body into the eternal cycle of the stars. The entire structure was a frozen piece of ideology, a permanent claim written in stone and aligned with the heavens that the pharaoh's divine power was as everlasting and orderly as the cosmos itself. This deep intertwining of astronomy and ideology reached its most radical and fascinating peak during the reign of the pharaoh Akhenaten in the 14th century BC. Akhenaten attempted a religious revolution, discarding the entire traditional pantheon of Egypt to worship a single, supreme deity, the Aten, or the sun disk itself. He built a new capital city, Akhetaten, dedicated solely to the Aten, and presented himself not just as the king, but as the sole intermediary between this singular god and humanity. While his motives were complex, some scholars suggest a dramatic celestial event may have played a role in reinforcing his radical claims, a solar eclipse. Imagine the impact of such an event on a population taught to revere the sun as the ultimate source of life. As the sun's light was dramatically extinguished in the middle of the day, Akhenaten could have positioned himself as the only one who could interpret this terrifying sign and commune with the angered deity. He and his queen, Nefertiti, are depicted in art with elongated, almost otherworldly features, bathed in the rays of the Aten, which end in hands offering the hieroglyph for life. This was the ultimate celestial propaganda. By making the sun itself the state god and himself its prophet, Akhenaten fused political and religious authority into an unprecedented concentration of power, using a celestial phenomenon to fundamentally reshape the spiritual landscape of Egypt. As Egyptologist Joanne Fletcher has emphasized, this was the ultimate goal of Egyptian celestial observation, to validate and maintain the pharaoh's divine power, thereby ensuring social and cosmic stability. The careful tracking of stars, the alignment of temples, and the interpretation of events were all in service of this central ideology. A well-ordered sky reflected a well-ordered kingdom under a righteous king. Any celestial irregularity, therefore, wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It was a potential crack in the foundation of the state, a sign that the pharaoh's connection to the gods was weakening and that chaos threatened to return. This system provided a powerful tool for social control. By monopolizing the interpretation of the heavens, the priesthood and the pharaoh could justify their authority, direct resources, and quell dissent, all under the unassailable argument that it was the will of the gods themselves, displayed for all to see in the infinite expanse above. The sky was more than a backdrop. It was the primary script for the performance of divine kingship, a performance that ensured the Nile would flood, the sun would rise, and the pharaoh would reign forever among the stars. While the Mesopotamians used rituals to cheat the stars and the Egyptians saw the pharaoh as an unassailable god-king, ancient China developed a far more revolutionary celestial contract, one that held the emperor himself directly accountable to the heavens. This was the mandate of heaven, or Chanaming, a philosophical and political concept that emerged during the Zhou dynasty around 1000 BC. It proposed a radical idea. The emperor, the son of heaven, did not own the throne by divine right, but held it on loan from heaven itself, contingent upon his virtue and his ability to maintain harmony between the celestial realm and the earthly world. His right to rule was not absolute, it was conditional, and the primary report card on his performance came from the sky itself. A well-ordered cosmos with predictable seasons and calm heavens meant the emperor was ruling justly. But a sudden, dramatic celestial event like a solar eclipse was the ultimate celestial audit, a glaring red flag from heaven that the emperor was failing in his duties, that corruption festered in his court, or that his virtue had waned. This belief transformed astronomy from a tool of royal propaganda into the most powerful check on absolute power the ancient world had ever seen. To uphold this system, the Chinese state developed one of the most sophisticated and continuous astronomical bureaucracies in history. The Imperial Astronomical Bureau was a cornerstone of the government, staffed by highly trained scholars who maintained meticulous, daily records of the sky for over 2 millennia. Their logs, which survive to this day, are a breathtaking chronicle of celestial events. They noted every eclipse, every comet, which they called broom stars for their appearance of sweeping away the old order, and every unusual planetary conjunction. The accuracy of these records is staggering. They even documented the sudden appearance of a guest star in 1054, now known to be the Crab Nebula supernova. But this wasn't done for scientific curiosity alone. It was a critical early warning system for the state. These astronomers were the watchmen on the tower, scanning the heavens for any sign of heavenly displeasure that could threaten the stability of the dynasty and the entire empire. The weight of these celestial warnings is embedded in the very foundation of Chinese history. The traditional date of 2134 BC is given for the earliest recorded solar eclipse, an event shrouded in legend and directly linked to the downfall of the Xia dynasty. The story goes that the astronomers Zai and he were so drunk and negligent that they failed to predict an eclipse, throwing the court into panic. As a result, the reigning king lost the confidence of his people and was eventually overthrown by the founder of the Shang dynasty. While the historicity of this specific event is debated by scholars, its power as a founding myth is undeniable. It established a pattern that would repeat for centuries. A celestial event triggers a political crisis that leads to a change in dynasty. The mandate of heaven had been withdrawn and the proof was written across the sun. This was not just ancient history, the mechanism remained potent well into the imperial era. Consider the story of Emperor Zhongzong of the Tang dynasty in the early 8th century. His reign was already fraught with tension, dominated by the influence of his powerful wife, Empress Y, and her faction. When a series of solar eclipses occurred in rapid succession, the court scholars and political opponents pointed to the sky as undeniable evidence of heaven's disapproval. The eclipses were interpreted not as random natural events, but as direct cosmic commentary on the Empress's undue influence and the Emperor's weakness in allowing it. This celestial criticism provided the perfect ideological cover for a coup. Soon after, Zhongzong died suddenly, almost certainly poisoned, and a brief but violent struggle for power ensued. While the eclipse didn't cause the poisoning itself, it created the political conditions that made his removal not just possible, but morally justified in the eyes of the people and the bureaucracy. The heavens had issued a vote of no confidence, and the earthly court acted accordingly. This entire system was reinforced by the core texts of Chinese philosophy. Confucian teachings explicitly framed the ruler's relationship with heaven as one of moral responsibility. The Confucian classic, the Shujing or Book of Documents, states, "Heaven sees as the people see, heaven hears as the people hear." This was a profound statement. The will of heaven was not mysterious or arbitrary. It was expressed through the welfare and the voices of the common people. If the people were suffering under a tyrant, heaven would show its displeasure through natural disasters and celestial portents. Therefore, an eclipse or a comet was not just a warning to the emperor, it was a validation of the people's suffering. It gave them, and more importantly, the scholarly bureaucracy that served the emperor, the moral authority to demand change. The emperor was expected to respond to these signs not with arrogance, but with humility and immediate correction. He would often issue public edicts of self-criticism, examine his policies for injustice, reduce taxes, or pardon prisoners. The sky, in effect, granted the emperor's subjects the ultimate right of rebellion, a celestial check on tyranny that made the Chinese throne powerful but never truly absolute. From the philosophical courts of China, we now sail across the world to the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean, where the Greeks and Romans wove the cosmos into an equally powerful, yet strikingly different political tapestry. For the Greeks, the sky was not a bureaucratic report card but a vibrant, chaotic stage for their gods and heroes. Celestial events were not impersonal omens to be logged by scholars. They were the direct, dramatic interventions of the Olympian deities themselves. Homer's Iliad gives us a breathtaking example. During a critical moment in the Trojan War, the great warrior Achilles is about to draw his sword against King Agamemnon, an act that would have shattered the Greek alliance. Suddenly, the goddess Athena appears to him alone, grabbing his hair and staying his hand. But for the wider audience, the epic suggests a more public divine sign, a solar eclipse, an event so portentous it could only be the work of Zeus, the king of the gods, throwing down a marker to stop the folly of men. This wasn't just storytelling. It was a cultural framework that embedded celestial phenomena deep within the narrative of human conflict, power, and divine whim. This mythological foundation, however, was about to be transformed into a systematic science that could be wielded for power. While the Babylonians were masters of observation, the Greek intellectual revolution brought a new desire to create order from the chaos, to map and predict the heavens with mathematical precision. This is where figures like Claudius Ptolemy, working in the Great Library of Alexandria in the 2nd century, changed everything. His monumental work, the Tetrabiblos, meaning 4 books, took the raw data of Babylonian astronomy and forged it into a comprehensive, logical system of astrology. Ptolemy argued that if the sun and moon could clearly influence the tides and seasons, then why couldn't the other planets exert their own influences on human affairs? He provided the complex rules, the detailed charts of planetary aspects and houses, that turned celestial interpretation from a matter of priestly intuition into a technical discipline that could be studied, debated, and most importantly, used. The Romans, ever the practical empire builders, saw the immense potential in this Greek system. They were less interested in Ptolemy's philosophical justifications and more in the tool he had inadvertently created. They adopted an aggressively politicized astrology, stripping it of much of its poetic connection to myth and reforging it into a blunt instrument of statecraft. A comet was no longer just a fearsome portent, it became a convenient public relations gift. We've already seen how Augustus used the comet of 44 BC to cement his father's divinity and his own legitimacy. He set a powerful precedent. Future emperors quickly learned that a well-timed celestial event could be exploited to justify expansion, celebrate a victory, or smear an opponent. The heavens became a partisan political arena. No emperor exemplifies this dark, manipulative potential better than Nero. In 64 CE, a massive fire erupted in Rome, burning for 6 days and devastating vast portions of the city. The population was desperate for answers and for someone to blame. Rumors swirled that the emperor himself had fiddled while Rome burned. Needing a scapegoat to divert public fury, Nero found his opportunity not on Earth but in the sky. Earlier that same year, a brilliant comet had appeared. Comets were traditionally seen as harbingers of change, often the death of a ruler. But Nero and his advisors brilliantly twisted this omen. Instead of accepting it as a judgment on himself, he pointed to the comet and declared it a celestial sign that the old gods were angry at the new, subversive sect of Christians who denied the traditional Roman pantheon. He claimed the fire was their fault and the comet was a divine instruction to purge them. This calculated act of celestial propaganda justified a horrific persecution, leading to the brutal deaths of countless Christians who were burned alive and torn apart by wild animals in the arena. In Nero's hands, a natural astronomical event became a weapon of mass murder and political survival, showing the terrifying real-world consequences when cosmic panic is deliberately directed by a ruthless leader. The Roman historian Suetonius, in his seminal work The Lives of the 12 Caesars, provides us with a fascinating window into just how deeply this celestial anxiety was woven into the daily life of power. He documents that Emperor Tiberius was so obsessed with astrology that he kept a personal astrologer, Thrasyllus, on the rocky island of Capri, consulting him on every major decision. But Tiberius also lived in constant fear of these prophecies. Suetonius recounts that if any other astrologer's predictions seemed too accurate or threatening, Tiberius would have them summarily executed, thrown from the very cliffs where they lived. This was the emperor's paradox, a desperate need to know the future, coupled with a terror of anyone else having that same knowledge. It wasn't just about guidance, it was about controlling the narrative of destiny itself. Emperors like Domitian would ban astrologers from Rome during times of unrest, not because they didn't believe in their power, but because they feared their predictions could inspire plots and revolutions. The stars had become a currency of insurrection, and the throne wanted a monopoly. This journey from the mythological skies of Homer to the calculating court of Tiberius reveals a critical evolution in Western thought. The Greeks gave the cosmos its stories and its structure, but the Romans perfected its use as a political tool. They took the divine playground of the Olympians and turned it into a strategic asset, a source of legitimacy, a weapon for persecution, and a trigger for paranoia. This adaptation shows a fascinating pragmatism. The Roman embrace of astrology was never purely about belief, it was about efficacy. If the heavens could help control the populace, justify an action, or destroy an enemy, then they were a force to be harnessed. This laid the foundational stone for a pattern that would repeat for centuries in the West. The use of celestial phenomena not just to explain the world, but to actively manipulate it, setting a precedent where the line between cosmic wonder and political weapon became dangerously thin. Now, let's cross the globe once more, to the dense jungles of Mesoamerica. where the ancient Maya and Aztecs forged a relationship with the cosmos so profound it dictated the very rhythm of life, death, and political power. Imagine a Maya astronomer priest high atop a stone pyramid temple, his eyes fixed on the velvet night sky. Below him, the jungle hums with life, but his focus is absolute, tracking the steady, predictable path of a brilliant point of light, the planet Venus. To him, this is not a planet. It is Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, and its cyclical journey from morning star to evening star was a divine script that scheduled wars, coronations, and the most sacred and terrifying of rituals. In this world, the sky was not a passive backdrop. It was a living, breathing entity in a constant, precarious balance, and it was humanity's duty, through precise calculation and, at times, extreme sacrifice, to maintain that cosmic order and prevent the universe from simply blinking out of existence. The foundation of this entire system was a suite of calendars of breathtaking complexity and accuracy, arguably the most sophisticated timekeeping system ever developed in the ancient world. The Maya didn't just have one calendar, they interwove several. The 260-day sacred round, or Tzolk'in, guided daily rituals and divination. The 365-day solar year, or Hob, governed agriculture and secular events, but the true masterpiece was the long count calendar, a linear measure of time that allowed them to calculate dates over thousands of years with pinpoint accuracy. This wasn't mere math, it was theology in numerical form. They believed time itself was cyclical, composed of repeating creations and destructions. The long count tracked these vast cycles, allowing the priesthood to pinpoint where they were in the grand cosmic story, and most importantly, to predict the auspicious or dangerous energies of specific days. A king would never think of launching a military campaign or ascending the throne on a date that the calendars deemed inauspicious. The heavens set the schedule, and earthly power moved in lockstep with the celestial clock. No celestial body was more closely watched or more feared than Venus. The Maya tracked its 584-day synodic period, the time it takes to go from one position relative to the Sun back to that same position, with a precision that still astonishes astronomers today. But this was not driven by scientific curiosity. Venus, in its incarnation as the god Kukulkan, was intimately associated with war and sudden, violent change. The Maya believed that when Venus rose as the morning star, it was a time of immense danger and potent energy. Their sacred texts, like the Dresden Codex, contain detailed tables predicting the first appearance of Venus after its period of invisibility. These were not academic exercises, they were military planning documents. A Maya king would use these tables to schedule raids and battles, believing that attacking under the auspices of the morning star would bring him the god's fierce favor and ensure victory. The sky didn't just suggest a time for war, it commanded it, turning astronomy into the ultimate strategic weapon. Yet for all the precise predictability of the planets, there were celestial events that shattered all order and plunged the Maya world into existential terror: eclipses. A solar eclipse, the sudden and terrifying disappearance of the sun, was seen as a moment of profound cosmic vulnerability. They believed it was a sign that the sun god was being attacked or, worse, was dying. The Maya word for eclipse, ik, even translates to "the sun is being eaten." This was not a metaphor, it was a literal crisis. They feared that without immediate and drastic human intervention, the sun might not return, plunging the world into eternal darkness. The prescribed intervention was as extreme as the perceived threat: blood sacrifice. It was believed that offering their own life force, the most precious substance in the universe, was the only way to nourish and strengthen the weakened sun god, to convince him to continue his journey across the sky. This is where the political and the spiritual became horrifically intertwined. While commoners might offer their own blood through personal bloodletting rituals, the responsibility for a major event like an eclipse fell upon the king, the Keuhul Ajor, or Holy Lord. He was the cosmic axis, the vital link between the human and divine realms. His blood was considered the most potent offering of all. In elaborate public ceremonies, the king would perforate his tongue, his earlobes, or his genitals with obsidian blades, allowing his royal blood to drip onto strips of paper that were then burned. The rising smoke would carry this divine sustenance to the heavens, a desperate plea to the gods to restore order. A king's ability to successfully navigate this ritual, to endure the pain and effectively save the sun, was the ultimate test of his legitimacy and power. Failure wasn't an option. The fate of the entire cosmos literally rested on his shoulders and the flow of his blood. Our most direct window into this world is the Dresden Codex, one of only 4 surviving pre-Columbian Maya books. This extraordinary bark paper manuscript, housed today in Germany, is far more than a religious text. It is an astronomical almanac and a manual for state survival. It contains detailed tables for predicting the movements of Venus and Mars, and most significantly, incredibly accurate eclipse tables that could forecast these events for cycles stretching centuries into the future. For the Maya priesthood, this knowledge was the ultimate source of their power. Being able to predict an eclipse allowed them to prepare the populace, stage the necessary rituals, and position the king as the heroic savior of the world. It turned a moment of potential panic and challenge to their authority into a brilliantly stage-managed demonstration of their divine connection. They didn't just react to the heavens, they anticipated them, using their astronomical prowess to maintain political control and social stability in the face of cosmic chaos. As scholar Anthony Aveney, a foundational figure in the study of ancient American astronomy, has long argued, this reveals the core of the Mesoamerican belief system. For the Maya and the Aztecs, who shared a similar cosmology, the universe was in a perpetual state of flux, balanced between creation and destruction. The gods were not all-powerful, they were often weary and needed sustenance. Celestial cycles were not immutable laws but fragile processes that required human participation to keep them on track. Astronomy, therefore, was the science of cosmic maintenance. By reading the sky, they could discern the will of the gods, anticipate their needs, and respond with the appropriate rituals, whether that was a scheduled war under Venus or a blood sacrifice during an eclipse. This created a world where the sky directly dictated the actions of the state, fostering a culture of both incredibly precise prophecy and, when those prophecies foretold danger, profound, ritualized panic. The heavens were the blueprint, and humanity was the mechanic, tasked with the endless, sacred duty of keeping the entire celestial engine running. From the blood-stained pyramids of the Maya, we now turn to a single, enigmatic celestial event whose light would eventually spread across the entire globe, shaping the course of Western civilization itself. The Star of Bethlehem, as recounted in the Gospel of Matthew, is perhaps the most famous celestial omen in history, a symbol of divine guidance that also cast one of the darkest shadows of political terror. The story is both simple and profound. Mysterious wise men from the east, known as the Magi, arrive in Jerusalem declaring they have seen a star heralding the birth of the new King of the Jews. They follow this celestial beacon to the town of Bethlehem, where they find the child Jesus and present him with gifts fit for a monarch. This tender scene of homage, however, triggers a chain reaction of fear, paranoia, and brutal realpolitik. The ruling king, Herod the Great, a man infamous for his ruthlessness in eliminating any potential threat to his power, feels his throne is directly threatened by this celestial announcement of a rival king. His response is swift and horrific: the massacre of the innocents, the order to execute all male children in Bethlehem under the age of 2. From its very first mention, this star is not just a spiritual symbol, it is a political lightning rod, a divine proclamation that clashes violently with earthly authority and exposes the terrifying price of power. For centuries, astronomers and historians have attempted to identify a real astronomical event that could explain the Star of Bethlehem, trying to square the narrative with the predictable mechanics of the cosmos. The great Johannes Kepler, a devout Christian and one of the most brilliant scientific minds of the 17th century, became fascinated by this very puzzle. In 1604, he observed a spectacular supernova, and just a few years later, a rare triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. This convergence, where the two largest planets in the sky appear to meet 3 times in a single year, was a breathtaking sight. Kepler knew that such events were astrologically significant, and he proposed that a similar conjunction around the time of Jesus' birth could have been the mystical star that guided the Magi. His approach was groundbreaking. He didn't dismiss the gospel account as mere legend, but instead used the emerging tools of science to explore a possible natural explanation, creating a fascinating early dialogue between faith and reason. Modern astronomers have built upon Kepler's work, proposing several compelling theories. A triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation Pisces around 7 BC is a leading candidate. To the astrologically literate Magi, who are likely Zoroastrian priests from Persia, this would have been overflowing with meaning. Jupiter was the planetary king, Saturn was associated with justice and protection, and Pisces was often linked to the lands of the West, including Judea. The message in the sky would have been clear: a great and just king was being born in the West. Other theories point to a close conjunction between Jupiter and the bright star Regulus in the constellation Leo, the lion, a symbol of Judah. Some suggest a brilliant comet, like the one that appeared in 5 BCE and was recorded in Chinese annals, its long tail perfectly resembling the classic depiction of a guiding star. Each of these theories provides a potential celestial trigger, a real event that could have been interpreted by the Magi as the sign they were waiting for, setting them on their fateful journey. But the true, enduring power of the Star of Bethlehem lies not in its potential astronomical identity, but in its profound symbolic meaning. It represents the ultimate clash between two competing sources of legitimacy. On one side was King Herod, whose power was entirely earthly, granted by the Roman Senate, maintained by military force, and secured through fear and political marriage. His authority was top-down and fragile, constantly under threat. On the other side was the newborn child, whose claim to kingship was presented as bottom-up, granted directly by the heavens themselves and announced not to emperors or generals, but to humble shepherds and foreign mystics. The star was a divine press release, a celestial coronation that completely bypassed the established political order. Herod's violent reaction reveals that he understood this threat perfectly. He wasn't just afraid of a toddler, he was terrified of the idea that a higher authority could anoint a king without his permission, rendering his own hard-won power suddenly illegitimate in the eyes of his people. This concept of celestial validation became a cornerstone of Christian theology and medieval politics for the next 1500 years. The Star of Bethlehem established a powerful precedent that God could and would use the heavens to communicate his will about who should hold power on earth. This idea was eagerly adopted by medieval European rulers who constantly sought to link their own reigns to divine favor. Coronation ceremonies were meticulously scheduled for astrologically auspicious moments. Coins were minted featuring stars and comets, echoing the iconography of the Nativity. When Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800, the symbolism was deliberate and potent. He was positioning himself as a new Christian emperor, his rule blessed by the same heavenly forces that had heralded the birth of Christ. The star had set a template, providing a sacred language of power that rulers could use to legitimize their authority and justify their actions to a devout populace. The legacy of this one celestial event is a testament to the dual-edged nature of celestial signs throughout history. The same star that guided the Magi to a message of hope and salvation also, indirectly, triggered a massacre of unimaginable cruelty. It illustrates how a single phenomenon in the sky can be a Rorschach test, its meaning dictated entirely by the viewer. For the Magi, it was a sign of joyous revelation. For Herod, it was a threat to be annihilated. For Christians, it became proof of God's intervention in human history. And for kings and emperors for centuries to come, it was the ultimate political precedent, a heavenly seal of approval that they could strive to emulate. The Star of Bethlehem shows us that the power of a celestial omen does not reside in the event itself, but in the profound and often contradictory human responses it inspires, weaving together faith, fear, and the eternal hunger for power into a story that continues to resonate 2,000 years later. If the blood-red moon of an eclipse was a targeted omen for kings, and a planetary alignment a calculated political tool, then the year 1347 delivered a celestial event that felt like a declaration of all-out war from the heavens upon all of humanity. As the bubonic plague began its relentless march across Europe, a terrifying new star appeared in the night sky, a comet with a long, sweeping tail that seemed to many to be a divine broom, sent to sweep away a sinful and corrupt world. This was no longer a sign meant for a single ruler. It was a broadcast of universal condemnation, and its timing could not have been more catastrophically perfect. The Black Death and the comet became inextricably linked in the medieval mind, a one-two punch of celestial warning and earthly punishment that shattered the very foundations of European society and plunged a continent into a panic from which it would never fully recover. The psychological impact of this coincidence was absolute. For a population already terrified by the rapid, gruesome, and utterly inexplicable spread of a disease that killed millions, the comet provided a terrifyingly simple explanation: God was angry. This was not a random tragedy, it was divine retribution. Medieval chroniclers who acted as the journalists and historians of their day made this connection explicitly. The Florentine banker and historian Giovanni Villani, who would himself tragically succumb to the plague, had been diligently recording the events leading up to the catastrophe. He noted the appearance of the comet, describing it as a fearsome omen, and then directly connected it to the ensuing pandemic. His work, left unfinished at his death, became a powerful testament to this belief, cementing in the historical record the idea that the heavens had spoken first, and the plague was the inevitable, dreadful response. This interpretation was aggressively championed and amplified by the most powerful institution of the age, the Church. In a time of profound crisis, the Church offered a framework for understanding the horror, but it was a framework that placed the blame squarely on humanity's shoulders. Priests and bishops preached that the comet and the plague were unambiguous signs of God's wrath against a world grown wicked and decadent. This rhetoric turned celestial panic into a potent tool for social control and, tragically, for scapegoating. If God was punishing everyone for the sins of a few, then finding and eliminating those few became a desperate public obsession. This unleashed a wave of horrific violence against communities already on the margins. Jewish populations, long accused of various conspiracy theories, were brutally persecuted in pogroms across Europe, accused of poisoning wells to spread the plague. Lepers, beggars, and foreigners were similarly targeted, burned alive or driven from cities in a futile attempt to appease the angry God who had sent both the comet and the pestilence. The political response from rulers, under immense pressure from the church and a terrified populace, was to enact laws of extreme public penance. Processions of flagellants began to march from town to town. These were groups of people who would publicly whip themselves, their backs torn and bleeding, in a dramatic display of atonement, believing that this self-punishment could ward off divine judgment. While initially tolerated, these movements often spiraled into violent anti-clericalism and further social chaos, forcing authorities to eventually ban them. The celestial omen had effectively created a parallel power structure of fanatical piety that challenged both church and state. Furthermore, the panic reinvigorated the idea of the crusade, not just in the Holy Land, but against any perceived enemy of the faith. The sense of an impending apocalypse made religious conflict even more urgent, as rulers sought to demonstrate their piety through military action, channeling the widespread fear into organized violence. The most profound and lasting impact, however, was on the feudal system itself. This rigid social structure, which had bound peasants to the land and lords for centuries, was built on a premise of stability and divine order. The twin calamities of the comet and the plague shattered that illusion completely. With as much as half the population dead in some regions, the scarcity of labor gave surviving peasants unprecedented leverage. They could demand higher wages for their work and better conditions, knowing the Lord had no one else to turn to. When lords tried to force a return to the old ways, it sparked widespread peasant revolts, like the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381. The heavens had not just sent a disease, they had, in the eyes of the common people, broken the chains of servitude. The cosmic warning intended to reinforce divine authority had instead, ironically, unleashed forces of social and economic liberation that would forever weaken the power of the aristocracy and alter the course of European history. The panic born from a streak of light in the sky ultimately helped dismantle the very world that had given that light such terrifying meaning. Yet even as this new scientific spirit began to ascend, the ancient political power of the heavens refused to simply vanish. It simply learned to wear new clothes. In the courts of Europe, rulers now walked a fascinating tightrope, embracing the new discoveries while still hedging their bets with the old astrological certainties. Perhaps no monarch embodies this delicate balance better than England's Queen Elizabeth I. Her reign was a masterpiece of public image and political calculation, and she understood that controlling the narrative, both earthly and celestial, was key to her survival. To that end, she employed one of the most brilliant and enigmatic minds of the age, John Dee. Dee was a true Renaissance man, a mathematician, geographer, and passionate advocate for the scientific work of Copernicus. Yet he was also the Queen's trusted astrologer and mystic. He famously used his celestial calculations to identify the most auspicious date for her coronation, January 15, 1559, ensuring her reign began under a favorable star. For Elizabeth, this was not a contradiction. Dee's blend of rigorous mathematics and traditional astrology provided a powerful tool for navigating the treacherous waters of international politics and domestic plots. He offered counsel on everything from the threat of the Spanish Armada to matters of statecraft, proving that even for a forward-looking ruler, the stars remained a vital source of strategic intelligence and political legitimacy. This persistent allure of celestial prophecy is thrown into sharp relief by the Great Comet of 1680. As it blazed across the skies of Europe, it became a Rorschach test for the anxieties of the age. In the absolutist court of France, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, had built his entire identity on the idea of divine right and unshakable control. The comet's sudden, defiant appearance was deeply inconvenient. His official court artists and chroniclers largely ignored it, attempting to project an image of undisturbed royal glory. But outside the gilded halls of Versailles, the comet sparked a frenzy of interpretation. Pamphleteers and critics of the king, many of them in exile, seized upon it as a heaven-sent omen foretelling the downfall of the arrogant monarch. They circulated prophecies and satirical verses linking the comet to the divine punishment they felt Louis richly deserved for his relentless wars and persecution of Protestants. The comet became a weapon in a propaganda war, demonstrating that in an era of burgeoning print culture, celestial events could be politicized and disseminated faster than ever before, their meaning contested not just in secret court memos but in the burgeoning public sphere. Historians of science like Patrick Curry have argued that this period should not be seen as a simple battle between science and superstition, which science inevitably won. Instead, it was a long, messy, and fascinating negotiation. The authority to interpret the cosmos was slowly shifting from astrologers and priests to a new class of professional scientists and academic institutions. Yet the ancient desire to find meaning in the sky, especially meaning that could explain or influence political power, proved incredibly resilient. The new science could predict a comet's path with stunning accuracy, but it could not strip away the deep-seated human instinct to see that comet as a message. The political use of astronomy didn't end. It simply adapted, finding new ways to coexist with a rational, mechanical universe. The comet of 1680, for instance, was meticulously observed by the leading astronomers of the day, including the young Edmund Halley, who used its data to begin formulating his theories on orbital periods. Yet at the very same time, the fear it generated was so potent that across the Atlantic, Boston minister Increase Mather preached to his Puritan flock that comets were the divine handwriting of God, warning a sinful people to repent. In the span of a single celestial event, we can see the entire spectrum of human understanding, from cutting-edge orbital mechanics to deep-seated apocalyptic fear, all coexisting and influencing how people, from kings to commoners, viewed their place in a rapidly changing world. Yet, even as Newton's calculations demonstrated the predictable mechanics of the cosmos, the old fears were not so easily vanquished. For the vast majority of people who lacked access to elite scientific circles or the latest almanacs, an eclipse remained a deeply unsettling event. The solar eclipse of 1715 may have been a triumph for Newtonian physics, but in the countryside many still trembled, ringing church bells and banging pots to scare away whatever demon was swallowing the sun. This created a fascinating societal split, a growing educated class that saw the heavens through the cool, precise lens of science, and a broader populace that still viewed them through the ancient, emotional lens of awe and dread. The Enlightenment, in many ways, was this very struggle playing out on a grand scale, a battle for the soul of humanity between the reassuring glow of reason and the terrifying, yet strangely comforting, shadows of superstition. This tension between the rational and the mystical was masterfully exploited by the era's most cunning rulers, the so-called enlightened despots. These monarchs, like Frederick the Great of Prussia, were fervent admirers of philosophers like Voltaire, with whom they corresponded at length about reason, liberty, and the separation of church and state. They proudly presented themselves as modern, rational leaders, yet behind closed doors they understood the enduring political utility of celestial symbolism. Frederick, a brilliant military strategist, was also a keen student of propaganda. He recognized that while the educated elite might be swayed by philosophical argument, the common soldier and peasant still responded to older, more visceral cues. He would carefully time military campaigns and major public announcements to coincide with favorable astrological alignments, not because he necessarily believed in them himself, but because he knew his subjects did. It was a calculated performance of power, a way to legitimize his authority in a language that resonated across all levels of his society. For Frederick, reason was a tool for governing himself, but omen was a tool for governing others. The philosophers of the age were, of course, deeply suspicious of this manipulation. Voltaire, in particular, launched a relentless satirical assault on what he saw as the dangerous foolishness of celestial prophecy. In his brilliant philosophical novel Candide, published in 1759, he uses the Lisbon earthquake as a central event to demolish the idea that natural disasters are divine punishments. The earthquake's devastation in 1755 had sparked intense debate, with many preachers declaring it a judgment from God on a sinful city. Voltaire savagely mocked this notion. Through his characters, he argued that to see a random geological event as a targeted moral lesson was not just illogical, but grotesquely cruel to the victims. He extended this razor-sharp critique to celestial omens, portraying those who believed in them as gullible fools and those who used them as cynical charlatans. For Voltaire, the fight against superstition was a fight for human progress. To believe that a comet could dictate human affairs was to surrender the precious gift of reason and remain enslaved to fear. This era, therefore, cannot be understood as a simple victory of science over superstition. It was a much more complex and enduring negotiation. The sky's influence on politics did not disappear. It simply evolved, retreating from the forefront of official state policy to the shadowy realms of propaganda, popular culture, and the human subconscious. The enlightened despot might publicly champion Newton while privately consulting an astrologer. The educated merchant might read about orbital mechanics in a London coffeehouse but still feel a primal shudder at the sight of a shooting star. The Lisbon earthquake proved that even a seismic event could reignite age-old debates about divine will and governance, demonstrating that the hunger to find meaning in catastrophe was a force far more powerful than any philosophical argument. The Enlightenment did not break the ancient bond between heaven and earth. It merely stretched it, creating a world where humanity now looked at the cosmos with two competing eyes, one filled with the precise equations of gravity, and the other still wide with the ancient fear and wonder of what it all might mean. For the Pawnee people of the Great Plains, the night sky was not a distant spectacle but a vast, living map and a sacred calendar that dictated the rhythm of their entire existence. Their villages were laid out as precise earthly reflections of the stars above, with each lodge positioned to mirror a specific star in the constellation we know as Corona Borealis. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was a profound declaration that human life was inseparable from the cosmic order. The Pawnee priesthood, a group of dedicated star keepers, would maintain all-night vigils, tracking the movements of the stars with an accuracy that governed their most critical decisions. The appearance of certain stars would signal the precise time to plant the sacred corn, the foundation of their sustenance. Others would dictate when to organize the summer buffalo hunt or when to embark on a raiding party. In this way, celestial events were the ultimate source of political and ecological authority, a divine schedule that ensured the survival and harmony of the people, blending agriculture, warfare, and governance into a single star-guided practice. This deep connection was expressed through a rich tapestry of stories where celestial events were not omens of doom, but dynamic interactions with the spirit world. The annual Leonid meteor shower, which many European cultures viewed with terror, was seen by tribes like the Lakota as a time of powerful spiritual communication. They understood the shower as the sky spirits illuminating the night for their earthly relatives, a celestial celebration that reinforced the bonds between the living and the ancestors. These events were woven into ceremonies and narratives that defined leadership roles and community values. A leader's wisdom was often measured by their knowledge of these stories and their ability to interpret the sky's messages for the benefit of the tribe, ensuring that celestial wisdom was the bedrock of social cohesion and identity. The arrival of European colonizers, however, marked a brutal assault on these sophisticated knowledge systems. Missionaries and government agents, viewing native spiritual practices as pagan superstitions to be eradicated, actively suppressed astronomical traditions. Ceremonies tied to celestial cycles were banned, and star knowledge was driven underground. The very land was taken and reshaped, severing the physical connection between ancient observatories and the horizons they were designed to watch. This was more than just cultural destruction. It was an attempt to dismantle an entire way of being in the world, to disconnect a people from the cosmic clock that had guided them for millennia. Yet, in the face of this systematic suppression, celestial knowledge became a powerful form of quiet resistance and cultural resilience. Elders continued to pass down star stories in secret, preserving a vital link to their identity and worldview. This persistence was a defiant act of remembering, a way to hold onto a unique understanding of the cosmos that stood in stark contrast to the emerging Western worldview. As modern indigenous scholars like Dr. Melissa K. Nelson have articulated, this contrast is fundamental. Western astronomy often leans toward instrumentalism, seeing the sky as a void to be measured, mapped, and exploited for navigation or scientific data. The native perspective is fundamentally holistic and relational, viewing the cosmos as a living, conscious entity filled with intelligent forces that are in constant, reciprocal relationship with humanity. This enduring wisdom offers a crucial lens through which to understand the political and prophetic power of the sky in native cultures. It was never about using the stars to predict a king's death or to schedule a battle for advantage. It was about maintaining a sacred relationship that ensured the continued balance of all life. A comet wasn't a harbinger of an emperor's fall. It could be a messenger announcing a time of renewal. An eclipse wasn't a threat to a ruler's life, but a moment for the entire community to come together in prayer and reflection to restore harmony that had been lost. This worldview fostered a form of politics deeply rooted in responsibility to the land, to the community, and to the cosmos itself. It was a prophecy not of inevitable fate, but of potential futures that could be nurtured or avoided through right action. This profound and resilient connection to the stars, maintained against all odds, reveals a celestial philosophy where the sky is not a canvas for panic, but a guide for living a balanced life, a wisdom that has endured as a testament to the unbreakable spirit of its keepers. While Napoleon Bonaparte was marshalling the greatest army Europe had ever seen for his invasion of Russia, a different kind of sovereign was making its own inexorable approach, one that would capture the global imagination and become inextricably woven into the narrative of his ambition and eventual ruin. In the spring of 1811, a magnificent comet erupted into the evening sky, growing brighter and more spectacular with each passing night until it stretched nearly half the length of the heavens. A celestial visitor with a nucleus glowing like a fiery coal and a tail that fanned out like a divine brushstroke of pure light. Visible to the naked eye for an astonishing 260 days, it became a constant, inescapable feature of the world above, a silent omen observed by peasants and emperors alike from the Americas to Asia. In an age already trembling on the brink of monumental change, this prolonged celestial spectacle became a universal screen upon which every nation and faction projected its deepest fears and wildest hopes, proving that even in a rapidly modernizing world, the ancient language of the stars still held a profound and terrifying power. Nowhere was this interpretation more potent or more politically charged than in the courts and camps of Europe, then locked in the brutal struggle of the Napoleonic Wars. For Napoleon's enemies, the comet was a godsend, a blatant and undeniable harbinger of the French emperor's impending downfall. In Britain, pamphlets and newspapers eagerly portrayed the long-tailed star of wrath as a sure sign that the heavens themselves were aligning against the Corsican usurper. Russian commanders, knowing they faced the onslaught of the Grand Armée, used the comet to bolster the morale of their troops and the populace, framing it as a divine promise that their motherland would be saved and the invader punished. They saw its brilliant, prolonged presence not as a passive observation, but as an active participant in their cause, a cosmic ally in the fight for national survival. The comet became a tool of psychological warfare, its light a beacon of resistance against what seemed an unstoppable force. Yet on the other side, Napoleon's own supporters and propagandists scrambled to spin the omen to their advantage. Some within his circle pointed to the comet's spectacular appearance as a fitting celestial coronation for an emperor of his world-shaking stature, a symbol of his unique, world-altering destiny. The French press, under strict imperial control, was more cautious, often downplaying its superstitious significance while still acknowledging its awe-inspiring beauty, careful not to assign it a meaning that could later be used against them. This frantic effort to control the narrative of a single astronomical event highlights a critical shift. The comet's meaning was no longer being dictated solely by priests or ancient texts. It was being fought over in the burgeoning arena of public opinion, through newspapers, pamphlets, and popular art, becoming one of the first global celestial events to be mass-mediated and politically weaponized for a broad audience. This cultural impact was perhaps its most lasting legacy. The comet seared itself into the artistic consciousness of the era, inspiring composers like Ludwig van Beethoven, who is said to have referenced its grandeur in his music, and a wave of poets and painters who tried to capture its sublime terror. But its most famous literary appearance came decades later in Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. Tolstoy uses the comet as a masterful symbolic device, seen by his characters on the eve of Napoleon's invasion. For the young, idealistic Pierre Bezukhov, the comet is a deeply personal and uplifting sign, a celestial mirror of his own inner awakening and a hopeful portent for all humanity. He sees it as a brilliant comet which was said to portend all kinds of woes and the end of the world. But to him, it symbolized something beautiful and full of new purpose. Tolstoy brilliantly captures the duality of the comet's meaning, the same celestial phenomenon that represented doom and geopolitical collapse for nations could simultaneously represent hope and personal redemption for an individual. It was a perfect symbol of fate, vast and impersonal, yet whose meaning is intimately crafted by every person who gazes upon it. Beyond the battlefields and the artist's studio, the Great Comet of 1811 demonstrated that celestial events could have strangely tangible economic consequences. Across Europe, but most famously in France, the 1811 vintage was declared one of the most exceptional in centuries. The long, warm, and unusually bright growing season, which many farmers and vintners directly attributed to the influence of the comet's prolonged presence, produced grapes of extraordinary richness and concentration. This gave rise to the enduring legend of the Comet Year wine, a vintage still celebrated by oenophiles today for its remarkable quality and longevity. Here was a direct and surprisingly positive link between the heavens and human commerce. The comet, widely feared as a portent of war and famine, had also gifted the world a thing of beauty and pleasure, a paradox that reminds us that the impact of these events is never monolithic. It could spark panic in a general and a poet, while simultaneously blessing a winemaker with a fortune, its influence flowing through the veins of society in unpredictable and contradictory ways, forever intertwining its story with the very soil and the seasons themselves. For thousands of years, a solar eclipse was the ultimate celestial verdict, a moment of divine judgment that could depose kings and spark rituals of blood and fear. But on May 29, 1919, humanity's relationship with these cosmic alignments underwent a radical and profound transformation. On that day, a total solar eclipse became something entirely new, not a portent from the gods, but a crucial experiment in a cosmic laboratory, a chance to test one of the most revolutionary ideas in human history. Two teams of astronomers led by Sir Arthur Eddington journeyed to opposite ends of the Earth, one to the island of Principe off the coast of Africa, the other to Sobral in Brazil. Their mission was audacious: to use the moon's shadow to measure the light from distant stars as it passed close to the sun's gravitational field. According to Albert Einstein's then controversial theory of general relativity, the sun's immense gravity should warp the very fabric of space-time itself, bending the starlight and making the stars appear slightly out of position. The eclipse provided the only natural conditions dark enough to see those stars next to the sun and prove it. When the results confirmed Einstein's predictions, it didn't just validate a theory. It fundamentally redefined our understanding of the universe and cemented the eclipse's new role as a cornerstone of scientific discovery, a tool for unlocking the secrets of the cosmos rather than a message of doom. This pivotal moment symbolizes a grand shift in human consciousness, a journey from superstition to science, the same celestial phenomenon that once sent Babylonian kings into hiding and prompted Chinese emperors to issue edicts of self-criticism was now being used to chart the curvature of the universe. Eclipses became opportunities. Scientists now eagerly chase the moon's shadow across the globe, using these brief moments of totality to study the sun's elusive outer atmosphere, the corona, to observe how solar radiation affects Earth's ionosphere, and to continue testing the very laws of physics. The dominant emotion is no longer terror but eager anticipation, the thrill of the chase and the promise of new knowledge. Public education and the democratization of science have played a huge role in this transformation. Today, millions understand the precise orbital mechanics that cause an eclipse. We can predict them down to the second and the meter, mapping the path of totality years, even centuries in advance. This predictive power has, for most, stripped away the ancient fear of the unknown, replacing it with a sense of participation in a grand, predictable cosmic dance. And yet, for all our advanced understanding, the primal awe remains, and in some corners of the world, the old superstitions persist with remarkable resilience. In many parts of India, for example, the eclipse is still viewed through a lens of traditional belief. The common explanation is that the sun, the source of life and vitality, is under attack by the shadowy demon Rahu, and his malevolent influence creates harmful vibrations or radiation. To protect themselves, many people avoid cooking or eating during the event, and food prepared beforehand is often discarded. Most strikingly, pregnant women are frequently advised to stay indoors entirely, not to look at the eclipse, and to avoid using sharp objects like knives or needles, all out of a deep-seated belief that the malefic rays could bring harm to the unborn child. This isn't a fringe practice, it's a widespread cultural tradition, a testament to the enduring power of ancient narratives that operate alongside, and not always in conflict with modern scientific explanation. It reveals a fascinating duality in the human psyche. We can simultaneously know the precise astronomical cause of an event and still feel the pull of the stories that have given it meaning for millennia. This duality even extends into the modern arena of politics, where eclipses are no longer seen as direct judgments on a leader's mandate, but can be skillfully leveraged as tools for public engagement and metaphorical power. A savvy political leader might use the shared experience of an eclipse as a moment of national unity, encouraging citizens to look up together in a collective moment of wonder, thus fostering a sense of shared identity. More subtly, the language of eclipses provides a powerful metaphor readily adopted in political rhetoric. A leader facing a scandal might promise to bring things out of the shadows or eclipse the corruption of the previous administration. The event's narrative, a period of darkness that is temporary, predictable, and always followed by the return of light, is an irresistibly optimistic frame for any political comeback story or policy initiative. It's a far cry from ancient emperors performing substitute rituals, but it's a modern political adaptation of the same principle, harnessing the symbolic power of the cosmos to shape public perception and reinforce a chosen narrative. Astronomers and educators today often speak of this unique balance. They note that while widespread scientific literacy has largely eradicated the mass panic described in ancient chronicles, it has done nothing to diminish the profound emotional and psychological impact of standing in the moon's shadow. If anything, knowing the science enhances the experience, adding layers of appreciation for the breathtaking celestial coincidence that allows our moon to perfectly cover our sun. The goal of modern astronomy outreach isn't to eradicate the sense of wonder, but to redirect it, to transform a fearful superstition into an inspired curiosity. The awe is no longer generated by the fear of the unknown, but by the stunning beauty of the known, the diamond ring effect, the sudden visibility of planets in the midday sky, the chilling drop in temperature, and the eerie silence of the animals. These sensations are now understood, but they are no less magical. We have not lost the mystery. We have simply exchanged one kind of mystery for another, trading the fear of capricious gods for the humbling, exhilarating wonder of a universe governed by elegant, knowable laws that we are only just beginning to comprehend. From the moment the first Babylonian king looked to the stars for a sign, the heavens offered a potent currency of legitimacy, a language of power that could be learned, interpreted, and most crucially, manipulated. This was the dark art of celestial propaganda, where the unpredictable whims of the cosmos were carefully curated into a predictable narrative of divine favor, transforming astronomy into the original public relations tool for authoritarian control. Perhaps no ancient ruler mastered this craft more brilliantly than Augustus Caesar. Following the assassination of his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, a brilliant comet appeared in the sky during funeral games held in his honor. While many Romans saw it as a standard omen of change, Augustus and his inner circle seized upon it with breathtaking political audacity. They didn't just acknowledge the comet, they branded it. They proclaimed it was nothing less than the soul of the deified Julius ascending to take his rightful place among the gods, a celestial endorsement of his legacy, and by direct extension, the authority of his heir. This narrative was then stamped onto coins, etched into public monuments, and woven into the poetry of the court. The Aeolium Sidus, the Julian star, became a permanent feature of the imperial iconography, a piece of celestial real estate that Augustus owned outright, using it to broadcast a simple, unchallengeable message to every citizen: my family's right to rule is written in the stars themselves. This playbook was adopted and refined across the globe. In China, the entire philosophy of the mandate of heaven was a system built on celestial legitimacy, but it was also a framework that could be gamed. A new emperor founding a dynasty would inevitably point to past comets, eclipses, or unusual planetary conjunctions that had occurred under the previous, now deemed corrupt regime, reinterpreting them as clear signs that heaven had withdrawn its favor. His own ascension, by contrast, would be framed as the inevitable and harmonious outcome of these celestial warnings. Court astronomers, who were state employees, knew their role was not just to observe but to narrate. Their reports would emphasize auspicious alignments and downplay or creatively explain away negative omens, ensuring the celestial narrative consistently supported the emperor's virtue and the dynasty's stability. The sky became a controlled press release, its message carefully edited before publication to maintain the illusion of unwavering divine support. This strategic manipulation did not vanish with the advent of the modern age and scientific rationalism. It simply evolved, retreating from the overt to the symbolic. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes, despite their professed commitment to secular, scientific ideologies, instinctively reached for the old tools of cosmic symbolism to build their cults of personality. While they openly mocked superstition, they understood the deep, psychological power of celestial imagery to convey destiny, inevitability, and superhuman power. The Nazi regime in Germany provides a fascinating case study in this modern tension. Adolf Hitler and his inner circle, particularly propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, were masters of myth-making, but they operated in a world where the public understanding of astronomy had advanced. They could not simply claim a comet was a sign for Germany without facing ridicule from an educated segment of the populace. Instead, they used celestial events more subtly. The total solar eclipse of August 21, 1933, was a major astronomical event visible across Europe, occurring just months after Hitler had seized power. The official regime response, as noted by historians like Claudia Schneermann, was to publicly downplay any superstitious interpretation. The event was framed in the press as a fascinating natural phenomenon, something for which German science could provide a perfect explanation. This rational approach served two purposes. It projected an image of a modern, scientifically advanced Germany, and it prevented any potential panic or alternative interpretations that could challenge the new government's authority. However, in the party's own internal propaganda and rhetoric, a different symbolism emerged. The eclipse's narrative of a temporary darkness being overwhelmed by the triumphant return of the sun was far too potent a metaphor to ignore. It was quietly co-opted to represent the perceived darkness of the Weimar Republic era, now being dispelled by the dawning light of the new Nazi order. The regime itself was the sun, returning to power and vitality after a period of obscurity. This allowed them to harness the emotional resonance of the celestial event without committing to a literal omen that could later be used against them. The exploitation of celestial imagery throughout history reveals a consistent pattern, as analyzed by experts like historian of science John Heilbronn. It is a strategy of borrowing the unimpeachable authority of nature and the cosmos to lend credence to deeply human political projects. A king's claim is just a claim. A king's claim backed by the sun, the moon, and the stars feels like a law of the universe. It shortcuts debate and quells dissent by appealing to a higher power beyond human reproach. This manipulation works because it taps into a fundamental human desire for order and meaning. In a chaotic world, the idea that a ruler's power is part of a grand cosmic design is profoundly comforting to many. It suggests stability and purpose. Authoritarian leaders, from ancient emperors to modern dictators, understand this deep-seated psychological need. They don't just use the sky to intimidate, they use it to reassure their followers that their rule is not just political, but planetary, that their authority is as natural and inevitable as the sunrise, making opposition seem not just treasonous, but almost blasphemous against the very order of the universe itself. But to truly understand why a comet could unnerve an emperor or an eclipse could halt an army, we have to look beyond the historical records and into the very wiring of the human mind itself. Our ancient ancestors were not simply superstitious or uneducated. They were operating with a psychological toolkit perfectly designed by evolution for survival on the ground, not for understanding the vast, impersonal mechanics of the cosmos. Two of the most powerful tools in that kit are pattern recognition and agent detection. Our brains are hardwired to find patterns even where none exist. Seeing a face in the clouds or a shape in the stars kept us safe. It meant we could identify a predator hidden in the bushes or predict the changing seasons from the behavior of animals. This same impulse, however, leads us to connect unrelated events. If a king dies shortly after a comet appears, the mind doesn't see coincidence, it sees causation. It constructs a narrative where the fiery streak in the sky caused the death, because a world where random, terrible things just happen is far more terrifying than a world where they are deliberate messages, even angry ones. We would rather have a universe with a wrathful God than a universe with no God at all, because at least the wrathful God can be pleaded with, appeased, or understood. This leads directly to agent detection, our innate tendency to believe that events are caused by the intentional actions of a conscious being. The sound of a rustle in the grass is much more likely to be a dangerous predator than the wind, so we evolved to assume agency first and ask questions later. This was a fantastic survival strategy on the savannah, but it created a profound misfire when applied to the heavens. A solar eclipse doesn't feel like the moon's shadow. It feels like something is doing this to the sun. A comet isn't a ball of ice following a predictable orbit. It is an arrow shot across the sky by some powerful, unseen archer. Our psychology demands an author for the event, and so we invented gods, demons, and dragons to serve as the agents behind these terrifying celestial phenomena. This wasn't a failure of intellect. It was a natural, almost inevitable byproduct of how our brains work, transforming the cold, empty silence of space into a crowded, intentional, and often dangerous supernatural landscape. This deep-seated need for meaning and control becomes especially potent in times of uncertainty. For ancient civilizations, life was fundamentally precarious. A single drought could bring famine, an unknown illness could wipe out a village, and the reasons why were often completely mysterious. In this context, celestial events became a focal point for collective anxiety. They were the ultimate unknowns, and their sheer scale and drama made them perfect vessels for projecting all of a society's unspoken fears about plague, war, and downfall. The sudden appearance of a comet didn't create the anxiety about an impending invasion. It gave that pre-existing, nagging fear a tangible shape and a name. It provided a shared explanation for suffering that was far more palatable than sheer, random bad luck. This is why the response was so often collective and ritualized, from the Babylonian substitute king ritual to the Chinese emperor's public apologies. The rituals were a way to reassert a sense of control. If the gods were angry, they could be appeased. If a ritual was performed correctly, the disaster could be averted. The terrifying randomness of the universe could be tamed through ceremony, giving people a script to follow and a way to feel like they were actively participating in their own salvation. What's truly fascinating is that these ancient psychological underpinnings haven't vanished, even in our modern, scientifically literate world. We can look at the Great American Solar Eclipse of 2017 as a perfect case study. The event was predicted with absolute precision decades in advance. Millions of people understood the exact orbital mechanics at play. There was no fear of a dragon eating the sun, and yet the cultural response was enormous. People traveled across the country to stand in the path of totality. They gathered for eclipse viewing parties, donning their protective glasses with a sense of reverent ceremony. The event was marked by a wave of ritualistic behavior, watching the countdown clocks, gasping in unison at the moment of totality, and feeling a profound, shared sense of awe. This wasn't panic, but it was a powerful, collective psychological event. It tapped into that same ancient need for wonder, for a shared experience that is bigger than ourselves, and for a temporary break from the ordinary. We had replaced the ritual of banging pots to scare the demon away with the ritual of sharing photos on social media, but the underlying impulse to mark the event, to come together, and to ascribe a deep personal meaning to it remained unchanged. Psychologists like Clay Routledge, who studies the human need for meaning, point out that celestial events, even today, tap into our existential fears and our search for significance. They remind us of our small place in a vast universe, which can trigger feelings of awe and insignificance simultaneously. This existential anxiety is a powerful motivator. It drives us to create stories, to find patterns, and to connect with others to reaffirm our place in the world. In ancient times, this meant creating myths about gods in the stars. Today, it might mean feeling a profound connection to strangers while watching an eclipse or pondering our place in the cosmos. The canvas of the sky remains the same, only the stories we paint upon it have evolved. This deep psychological need is the engine that has always driven the intersection of celestial events and human history. It explains why the stars have never been just balls of gas, but mirrors, reflecting back our greatest fears, our deepest hopes, and our eternal, unshakable desire to find meaning in the magnificent darkness above. The story sounds almost too perfect to be true. In 585 BCE, on the banks of the Halley River in what is now Turkey, the armies of the Lydian Empire and the Medes were locked in a brutal 5-year war that had ground to a bloody stalemate. The historian Herodotus, writing over a century later, describes the scene: the clash of bronze shields, the din of battle, the exhaustion of two great powers unable to secure victory. And then, in the midst of the fray, the unthinkable happened. The sky, without warning, began to darken. The sun, the very source of light and life, was steadily and silently devoured by an invisible force, plunging the battlefield into an eerie, premature night. For the soldiers below, this was not a natural phenomenon, it was a message. Both sides immediately threw down their weapons. The fighting ceased. They interpreted this overwhelming celestial event not as an omen for one side, but as a shared sign of divine displeasure with the entire conflict. The shock and awe were so profound that the leaders, King Alyattes of Lydia and Cyaxares of the Medes, used the moment to negotiate a peace treaty, sealed by the marriage of Alyattes' daughter to Cyaxares' son. What years of savage warfare could not achieve, a few minutes of celestial darkness accomplished, forging a peace that would last for generations. This tale, passed down through Herodotus, is one of the most enduring and elegant stories from the ancient world. It presents a powerful vision of the heavens acting as a supreme diplomat, imposing reason upon the irrationality of men. But how much of it can we actually believe? Modern astronomy can, with remarkable precision, calculate the paths of historical eclipses. We know a total solar eclipse was indeed visible over that very region on May 28, 585 BC. The celestial clockwork aligns perfectly with the story. This scientific validation makes the account incredibly compelling, but it doesn't automatically verify the historical details of the battle's abrupt end. Herodotus, often called the father of history, was also a master storyteller who collected narratives from across the known world. His work is a blend of verified fact, hearsay, and myth. He was writing for a Greek audience that expected a good story, and the dramatic notion of a war stopped by the gods would have been far more satisfying than a more mundane tale of two exhausted armies agreeing to a truce after a strange astronomical event. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. The eclipse provided a potent, universally recognized excuse for both sides to do what they likely already wanted to do: end a costly and fruitless war. The heavens offered a face-saving way out, a divine intervention that allowed both kings to retreat without the appearance of weakness. This is where the story's real power lies, regardless of its literal truth. The very fact that it was told, retold, and preserved by Herodotus demonstrates a universal ancient belief in the political and diplomatic power of celestial events. The narrative itself became a form of political law, a precedent that would be remembered and referred to for centuries. It established a template for how a celestial phenomenon could be used as a neutral third party in human conflict, a higher authority that could command the attention of warring factions when all other appeals had failed. This symbolic power is arguably more significant than the historical fact. The story of the eclipse that stopped a war entered the cultural handbook, teaching future generations that the sky could be an arbitrator, that its signs could provide the perfect moment for de-escalation and peace. We can see this template being used, or at least attempted, in later conflicts. During the protracted and devastating Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta in the 5th century BC, the historian Thucydides records multiple eclipses, both solar and lunar. Unlike Herodotus's tidy story, Thucydides shows us how these events were actively weaponized within the context of an ongoing war. A solar eclipse in 431 BC caused such panic in the Athenian navy that their general, Pericles, was forced to take action. Seeing his superstitious sailors paralyzed with fear, he reportedly held his cloak over his head and asked them if they were afraid of that too. By demonstrating that the eclipse was merely an obstruction of light, he calmed their nerves and prevented a military disaster. Here, the eclipse was not a neutral party but a tool for psychological warfare that a savvy leader had to actively counter to maintain command and morale. Conversely, a lunar eclipse in 413 BC had the opposite effect. The Athenian army, trapped and desperate during their disastrous expedition to Syracuse in Sicily, was preparing to retreat under cover of darkness. As they began their move, a lunar eclipse occurred. The Athenian generals, steeped in the same superstitions as their men, interpreted it as a dire omen and foolishly decided to postpone the retreat for the ritually prescribed 27 days. This catastrophic delay allowed the Syracusans to fully encircle and destroy the Athenian force, effectively ending Athens's golden age. In this case, the perceived power of the celestial event directly led to a military catastrophe. It wasn't a divine message that caused the defeat. It was the human interpretation of that message, a decision based on fear and tradition rather than tactical necessity. Historians today continue to debate the veracity of Herodotus's account, and that debate is itself revealing. Some scholars argue that the alignment of the eclipse is simply too perfect to ignore, that it provides a rare instance where we can pin a specific ancient story to an exact astronomical date. Others are more skeptical, pointing out that Herodotus's account is our only source for this event, and that his work is filled with similar moralistic tales designed to illustrate a larger point about human nature. The debate forces us to consider the role of myth in shaping historical memory. Whether the battle stopped because of the eclipse or was simply called off around the time of the eclipse, the story as it has come down to us is what mattered. It became a foundational myth about the power of nature to humble human ambition, a story that resonated because it reflected a deep and widely held belief system. This case study ultimately shows us that the line between historical fact and powerful myth is often blurred, especially when it comes to celestial events. The eclipse of 585 BC may or may not have single-handedly stopped a war, but its enduring legacy is undeniable. It stands as a powerful symbol of a time when the sky was an active participant in human affairs, its sudden darkness a language that every culture could understand. It reminds us that historical impact is not always about what actually happened, but about what people believed happened and how those beliefs went on to shape their decisions, their stories, and their understanding of their place in a vast and mysterious cosmos. The story's persistence proves that sometimes a perfect narrative can hold more power over the human imagination than a messy, complicated reality. Even in our age of satellites and supercomputers, the ancient pull of the stars has not released its grip on the human imagination. It has simply shape-shifted, embedding itself into the very fabric of our modern politics and popular culture in ways that would be instantly recognizable to a Babylonian astrologer or a Maya priest. The most direct line from the ancient world to the modern is perhaps the quiet yet persistent practice of world leaders consulting astrologers for guidance. While most governments would never officially admit to such a thing, the phenomenon is well documented. The most famous modern example is undoubtedly that of First Lady Nancy Reagan, who, throughout her husband's presidency, relied heavily on the astrological readings of a San Francisco-based astrologer named Joan Quigley. Following the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan in 1981, Nancy's fear for her husband's safety became all-consuming. Quigley was secretly hired to determine the most auspicious times for the president's travels, major speeches, and even the timing of his surgeries, all in an effort to avoid what she deemed dangerous celestial influences. When this arrangement was eventually revealed in former Chief of Staff Donald Reagan's memoir, it caused a national scandal, not because people were surprised that astrology existed, but because they were stunned that it could wield such influence at the highest levels of power in the world's most technologically advanced nation. This was not the public celestial propaganda of an Augustus Caesar. It was a private, almost desperate, attempt to impose a sense of order and safety on the terrifying randomness of political violence, proving that the desire for cosmic reassurance is utterly timeless. Beyond the closed doors of the powerful, the language of the heavens remains a potent metaphorical tool in the public square. Politicians of all stripes instinctively reach for astronomical imagery to frame their narratives, because these metaphors carry a weight and a simplicity that transcends complex policy debates. A rising candidate is a rising star, a transformative policy is a moonshot, a political defeat is an eclipse, a campaign gaining momentum has celestial alignment. These are not just empty phrases, they are deliberate invocations of a shared cultural understanding of the cosmos as a place of destiny, scale, and inevitable force. They tap into that deep, ancient part of our psyche that views the movements of the heavens as a grand story of power, decline, and renewal, allowing a politician to borrow that grandeur for their own earthly ambitions. The rhetoric connects their struggle to something eternal and universal, making a campaign speech feel like a chapter in a much larger cosmic story. And that public imagination remains as captivated as ever by specific celestial events, though the framework has often shifted from divine omen to conspiratorial sign. The blood moon, a term popularized by certain Christian pastors for a total lunar eclipse, has become the centerpiece of modern prophecy movements, predicting everything from rapture to global economic collapse. Planetary alignments, like the much-hyped grand conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 2020, are breathlessly discussed on social media as portals for spiritual awakening or markers of a new age. While the medieval peasant might have feared a comet as a sign of God's wrath, the modern individual might see the same comet as evidence of a hidden planet called Nibiru on a collision course with Earth, a theory that proliferates through YouTube videos and online forums. The medium has changed, but the psychological engine is identical, a deep-seated need to find pattern, meaning, and intention in the vast, impersonal mechanics of the universe. The conspiracy theory is simply the ancient omen dressed in digital clothing, offering a narrative of secret control in a world that often feels chaotic and unmanageable. This enduring fascination has inevitably been commercialized. The awe that once inspired blood sacrifices and imperial rituals is now packaged and sold to us as entertainment. A plethora of smartphone apps can now identify every star and planet above us with a simple point of our device, turning the night sky into an interactive screen. Media companies promote eclipse tourism, with special travel packages to the path of totality, selling T-shirts and commemorative glasses. Streaming services produce lavish documentaries about the cosmos, often narrated by voices dripping with melodramatic significance. We have democratized and commodified the celestial experience, making it accessible and safe. Yet, even in this sanitized commercial form, an echo of the ancient awe remains. Standing in a field with hundreds of strangers, all gasping in unison as the moon completely covers the sun, there is a palpable, shared moment of wonder that transcends the transaction. The commercialization may be the vehicle, but the destination is still that primal, humbling connection to the sublime. Cultural critics have long pondered why these traditions persist with such vigor in a supposedly disenchanted scientific age. The sociologist Max Weber argued that the modern world was undergoing a process of disenchantment, where scientific explanation would steadily erode magical and religious worldviews. Yet, the persistent power of celestial symbolism suggests a more complex reality. As author and journalist Ariel Levy notes, in a world of overwhelming complexity and anxiety, people are often drawn to systems that offer a sense of order and destiny, whether it's a horoscope, a prophecy, or a conspiracy theory. These frameworks provide a story, and humans are inherently storytelling creatures. Science can tell us the how, the precise orbital mechanics of an eclipse, but it often struggles to answer the why we feel such profound emotion witnessing it, or what it means for our lives. The ancient practices of astrology and celestial interpretation fill that existential void, offering meaning, purpose, and a sense that our individual lives are connected to a larger, intentional cosmic drama. They persist not out of ignorance, but out of a deep and enduring human need for narrative in the face of a silent, star-filled universe. From the meticulous records of Babylonian astrologers to the secret consultations in the White House, our journey reveals a thread of human experience woven directly through the stars. We've seen how a comet's sudden flash could unnerve an emperor in Rome, how the moon's shadow could force a Chinese ruler to publicly atone for his failures, and how the predictable dance of planets was used to schedule coronations and launch empires. This was never simply about astronomy, it was about authority. The sky provided an unchallengeable source of legitimacy, a language of power that transcended borders and centuries, offering a divine script that kings and prophets could use to justify their rule, explain chaos, and unite their people under a common cosmic story. Yet these stories are about more than just the manipulation of power. They speak to something far more profound and universal within us: our enduring, innate need to find meaning in the vast and often terrifying unknown. That sudden, heart-stopping moment when the sun vanishes at midday or a star with a tail burns across the heavens triggers something deep in our psyche. It is a reminder of our own smallness, a confrontation with forces infinitely greater than ourselves. Our ancient ancestors met that confrontation not with resignation, but with creativity, building elaborate myths, sophisticated sciences, and powerful rituals, all in an attempt to answer a single, haunting question. Are we alone in this universe, or is someone, something, trying to send us a message? That quest for an answer is what drove the construction of pyramids aligned with Orion's belt, the meticulous eclipse records of Chinese scholars, and the desperate substitute king rituals of Mesopotamia. It is a quest that has never truly ended, and that is the most fascinating part of all this. While the framework has changed, the fundamental human response to the cosmos has not. We may no longer believe a dragon is eating the sun, but millions of us still travel across continents to stand in its shadow, feeling that same primal awe. We may understand the gravitational mechanics of a planetary conjunction, but we still pause to look up at the close dance of Jupiter and Saturn, feeling a sense of wonder that no scientific explanation can diminish. We've exchanged the court astrologer for the astrophysicist, the omen for the scientific press release, but the longing remains. We still turn to the stars to understand our place in the world, to find patterns in our chaos, and to feel connected to something greater than our daily lives. So the next time you find yourself under a clear night sky, away from the city lights, take a moment to really look up. See the same stars that a Babylonian priest tracked on his clay tablet, the same planets that a Maya king used to time his battles, the same moon whose eclipse sent a Roman emperor into hiding. You are now part of that long, unbroken chain of human curiosity and wonder. The questions we ask today are different, but the awe is the same. The sky above us is the greatest shared inheritance of humanity, an endless source of mystery that has shaped our past and will continue to inspire our future. It reminds us that our story has always been and will always be written in the stars. If you've enjoyed this journey through the cosmos and human history, feel free to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the past. Let us know in the comments below which celestial story resonated most with you. Thanks for